Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 182. Do you have evidence? This was James's last shot. He believed that someone would stand up. Moreover, people were like sheep. If one took his offer, others would follow. Sure enough, as soon as James's voice faded, some people in the crowd began to stir. A moment later, a young blonde man was the first to muster up the courage to stand and say, "Officer, I saw it just now. It was Mad Dog who was in the wrong. The other guy was just defending himself. He didn't break any law." After he finished speaking, no one said anything. They all looked at James. They were not concerned about whether James had broken the law or not. They wanted to know if James would keep his word and pay the man who had spoken. "You, come here." James waved him over with a smile. "Do you have a banking app on your phone?" "Of course," the young man said excitedly, taking out his phone. James took out his phone and, after getting the young man's information, transferred $10 million to him. The whole process was calm and natural. When the young man saw his balance, he threw his head back and roared with laughter. "Oh man, you really transferred $10 million to me. You are truly a god." As it happened, he was a waiter here, not a patron. Some of the patrons were already millionaires, but for a worker like him, that much money was life-changing. No wonder he was so excited. When they saw that the waiter had really earned $10 million with just a couple of sentences, the people around them stopped trying to conceal their greed. "I can also prove it to him, and me. I want to give a statement." In an instant, the situation changed. A group of people rushed forward. The remaining 9 offers were all snapped up in an instant. Everyone told Winterson that James had not broken the law and that Mad Dog had provoked him. Officer Winterson's face fell. Now that there was all this evidence, it was impossible for him to arrest James and Edward King. What's more, he could only watch as the $100 million flowed into other people's pockets right in front of him. Seeing that Officer Winterson was defeated, Edward King immediately laughed and said, "You don't have anything to say now, do you?" Seeing that the police could no longer arrest anyone and that there were no more major problems here, Officer Winterson snorted coldly, dusted off the front of his uniform. He turned around and was about to leave with his men. But James stepped forward and suddenly said, "Officer, wait." Officer Winterson was not in a good mood. He asked impatiently, "What do you want?" "Mad Dog here is harassing innocent people. Shouldn't you do something about that?" James said this casually, but there was no doubt in his tone. His words were like a friendly reminder. Officer Winterson's face was full of embarrassment. Everyone looked at him. He could not remain silent. He immediately put on a righteous expression and shouted loudly, "Mad Dog has violated the law. Cuff him." When Mad Dog heard that, he was instantly dumbfounded. "What's wrong with this guy?" he thought. "Haven't I paid him enough in the past?" Who would have thought that Officer Winterson would suddenly walk over and slap him in the face? Winterson said fiercely, "You better not make trouble." It was true that Mad Dog had paid him off in the past, but he was about to get a lot more money from James. $10 million at least, probably. Thinking about this, he felt very happy. He turned around and said to James with a smile, "How about that?" James did not say anything. He gave Winterson a thumbs up, but nothing else. This made the officer a little depressed. After hesitating for a while, he finally opened his mouth and said, "Well, what did you say?" James pretended to be stupid. Officer Winterson cursed in his heart. However, for the sake of $10 million USD, he endured it. In the end, he actually opened his mouth and said shamelessly, "Don't you think you should give me something for doing what you wanted?" James pretended to be surprised, then looked at Officer Winterson and asked with a pleasant face, "Oh, did I say I would do that?" When Officer Winterson heard this, he was furious. Seeing that he was speechless, James spoke sharply, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. "Isn't it your duty to be a police officer?" James asked. "I am not your superior. Why should you do as I say? And you already get paid by the people. Why should I give you money?" At this moment, Officer Winterson seemed to have realized that he had been fooled by this guy. The onlookers all applauded James. They felt that he was speaking very well. This Officer Winterson was a very influential person. He only cared about money. He often used his power to bully the people here. The people around him had long hated him. However, due to the power in his hands, they did not dare to say anything. James's teasing today had helped them vent their anger. King gave him a thumbs up. Officer Winterson had never suffered such humiliation before. He stomped his foot hard and his blood boiled. In an instant, he took out the gun at his waist. The black muzzle of the gun was pointed at James. "You are very proud of yourself, aren't you? Give me the money right now. 10 million USD or I'll shoot you in the head." The bar instantly became silent. However, James smiled faintly and did not panic at all. He said calmly and unhurriedly, "You don't want to give the police a bad name, do you?" Now Officer Winterson was completely enraged. He clenched his teeth and pulled the trigger. It was as if time had stopped. Surprisingly, the loud sound of the gun was not heard. There was no bleeding wound on James's forehead. His brains didn't fly everywhere. While everyone else was shocked and confused, James looked at Officer Winterson with a smile and said with a hint of ridicule, "Do you want to know why your gun didn't go off?" Even Krista, Vanessa, and Katie were astonished. They did not know why James was so calm. James took a handful of bullets from his pocket and said to Officer Winterson with a smile, "Because your ammunition is here." The bar instantly erupted in excitement. "Oh my God, what's going on? How did he do it? Does he have telekinesis?" The bar was in an uproar. Even Officer Winterson, who was still pointing his gun at James, was shocked. James had never approached him, so how had he stolen his bullets? "All right, aren't you tired of pointing an empty gun at me like that?" James pushed the gun aside and returned the bullets to the officer with a bright smile on his face. "You can continue loading and then point the gun at me." But then he added, "Oh right, Officer Winterson, I have your murder attempt on video. Of course, if you still want to shoot, you can do as you please." James even turned his back after he finished speaking, as if he did not care about the gun in the man's hand at all. In fact, Officer Winterson was shivering. He didn't have the courage to shoot. This man's actions could only be supernatural. He immediately said, "No way. You are a magnanimous person. Don't lower yourself by killing me." Without waiting for James to speak, he turned to his subordinates and said, "What are you guys still standing there for?" He pointed at Mad Dog and said sternly, "Handcuff this criminal and bring him back to the station." He turned and gave James a cautious and flattering smile. "Sir, I have to thank you especially. This man is a vicious criminal. If you had not subdued him today, I'm afraid we would have had to spend a lot of effort to do it ourselves. So I thank you on behalf of the Queen's government for your bravery. I will recommend you for a medal." The change in Officer Winterson's attitude was so great that everyone's eyes widened in disbelief. He seemed totally sincere. This guy deserved an Oscar. However, James was not too surprised by the change in his attitude, because he knew that Winterson was a sensible person. He had no choice but to obey James and would not dare to enforce the law in such an arrogant manner in the future. James looked at Officer Winterson like a senior official dismissing a subordinate as he said, "Go." That stunned everyone present. Officer Winterson quickly took his men and disappeared from the bar with Mad Dog in tow. As soon as they left, the entire bar was instantly filled with applause. The people seemed relieved to see them go. Then King instructed his staff to tidy up the place and announced that drinks were on the house for everyone. The whole bar instantly returned to its lively atmosphere. Episode 183. What a coincidence. Edward King was a very talkative person. He invited James to a VIP room in the bar. After a good chat, James asked, "Oh, right. Do you want to save the video I just talked about?" "Which video?" "The video that can be used to accuse Winterson of attempted murder. He might come back and try to make trouble after I leave, so you should have it on hand." "Oh, I understand. Yes, of course. Thank you." Edward's eyes were full of admiration. Naturally, Edward became James and his companions' tour guide throughout London. They visited many famous attractions such as Big Ben, the British Museum, the London Eye, and the famous Buckingham Palace. Edward was an excellent guide and arranged for the best accommodations as well. The London trip was unusually relaxing and pleasant, which made James feel less bored. In a flash, 4 days had passed. It was time to say goodbye because James was still heading to Cambridge to check in. Besides Oxford, Cambridge was the most prestigious university in England. He would want to see it even if there weren't a check-in there. The journey from London took about an hour and a half. Edward did not accompany James and the women because he had something to do. Instead, he lent them his beloved Mercedes-Benz and let James drive there by himself. The scenery along the road seemed familiar to James. He thought about it and suddenly remembered that he had seen it in the movies, such as the Harry Potter series. He felt like he was driving through a primitive forest. There was a humid, vegetal smell in the air. The three beauties were naturally in a beautiful mood. He said, "Krista, you're a top student at Harvard. You must be pretty excited to visit Cambridge." Krista thought about it and said seriously, I am curious. After all, this is one of the top universities in the world. I'd love to talk to some of the students." James said with a laugh, "Okay, when we have time, we will go to the university and have a good conversation. Whatever you want to talk about, we will talk about it." At this time, Vanessa and Katie, who were sitting in the back, shouted at the same time, "We want to go too." However, James turned his head and looked at Vanessa and Katie teasingly. "Maybe that's not such a good idea." "You jerk! Who do you think you're talking to?" "Forgive me. Forget I said anything." The four of them chatted and laughed all the way in the car. The atmosphere was lively and relaxed. The drive passed easily and happily. Soon they drove into the small town where the University of Cambridge was located. The buildings here were exactly the same as the one in the movies. The medieval European style was reflected everywhere. The whole place gave off an ancient and romantic feeling. Entering the town gave people a sense of ancient history. It was as if they were wandering in the past. The town was not very big, but it was very busy. When they arrived, James looked at the simple but large school gate. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and many students of all different skin tones were entering and exiting. James, a handsome man, brought the 3 beautiful women to the school gate. "Ah, Cambridge, I'm coming." Vanessa was always the most eager. She and Katie ran to the gate with their arms spread open. Krista and James looked at the 2 girls and just kept shaking their heads. Suddenly he remembered his medicinal check-in mission. He started to walk around the school gate casually. He seemed to be looking at the magnificent gate, but in reality he was looking for the spot for the check-in. Finally, when James arrived at the center of the gate, the system's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. "Check-in successful. Congratulations to host for obtaining 100% stake in Excalibur Company. Related information and share certificates have been distributed to the special storage of medicinal host. Please take note of them. Next mission spot, Ice Island's Harlem Cathedral." A series of system announcements rang out, and James's entire body shook. "Oh my God, you are James?" Before James could take a closer look at what he had obtained, a voice that was filled with surprise but exceptionally pleasant to hear instantly entered his ears. The voice was as melodious and elegant as a yellow oriole's, making James feel a sense of familiarity when he heard it. He suddenly turned his head and saw a familiar figure. "It's you," he said. "What a coincidence." "Yes, what a coincidence." A girl walked towards James with a sweet smile as she echoed his words. This girl was a college classmate, Cindy Yarrow. Cindy had been an English major and one of the best-looking women at the school. Looking at her bright and limpid eyes, James smiled and said, "You're still so pretty." Time had no effect on her appearance. She was still as young-looking and as beautiful as when she was in college. It made James feel slightly shy. They had a history. This bright and beautiful flower had actually secretly revealed something to him in the past. That's right, Cindy had secretly confessed to James that she had a crush on him. He'd first caught her eye as a star basketball player, and her feelings had only grown stronger. But he'd turned her down. It had been quite a blow to her. She hadn't expected that they would meet here after so many years. Cindy smiled. "You flatter me." James seemed to realize that he was staring straight at her. He immediately asked in embarrassment, "Oh, why are you here?" She smiled. "Do you know that game show, The Strongest Brain, back home?" "Yeah, I know it. There are some real brainiacs on that show." "Well, they're recording a special episode here, and a Cambridge professor is the leader of one of the competing teams. I am here to participate in the competition." "Oh, that's amazing. I really didn't realize that you had such amazing skill," said James. Jokingly, he added, "So you came out to win glory for our country?" Cindy laughed. "You kid, but it is an international competition. I will try my best." At this time, James's three beautiful companions had finished their obligatory round of selfies. When they saw James chatting happily with a good-looking woman, their hearts were filled with jealousy. "Really, James?" said Katie. "Flirting with another girl right under our noses? We'll just see about that." Vanessa was about to rush over, but Katie pulled her back. Vanessa turned around and looked at Katie. "What are you doing? Do you mean to say you're okay with this?" "Oh no," said Katie, "but we know that girl. Remember Cindy from school?" "It's even worse than I thought." When Vanessa heard that, she could not help but struggle free from Katie's hand. Krista pulled her back and said, "Don't be impulsive. Maybe he's not flirting, but just talking." Fine." In the end, under Katie and Krista's persuasion, Vanessa cooled off. Katie had already walked over and greeted their old friend. "Cindy, what are the odds?" "Katie, what are you doing here?" But then Cindy's eyes revealed a look of understanding. She pointed at Katie and James and nodded. "Oh, I know. You two finally tied the knot. Am I right?" She'd had a crush on James in the past, but that was ancient history. She didn't harbor any ill will toward them. Sort of," said Katie. "Come on, you guys must be on your honeymoon, right?" But before Katie could reply, Vanessa's voice came from behind James. "Yeah, we're on our honeymoon together." Krista and Vanessa stood beside James. Cindy was stunned. She didn't know how to respond. James was also speechless. After more than 10 seconds, Cindy looked at James and the three beauties and asked in surprise, "The four of you are on a honeymoon together?" Episode 184. Watching the Game. "Well, what's wrong with that? Who said four people can't have a honeymoon together?" demanded Vanessa. James felt a little embarrassed. Why did Vanessa have to say whatever was on her mind? Her words shocked Cindy, but Katie and Krista looked at her calmly. They seemed to approve of Vanessa's words and didn't have any intention of refuting her. Cindy really didn't know why these three great beauties would all be so devoted to the same man and conduct their relationship openly. But although she was curious, she figured it wasn't any of her business. On the other hand, James looked at Cindy with an aggrieved expression. At this moment, a middle-aged man in his 50s shouted to Cindy, "Hey, Cindy, let's go. We should go in." There were more than 10 other people with him. James figured that this was the American team Cindy was on. "Coming, Professor West," Cindy replied. Then she turned to James and said, "I'm sorry, but we're going in to participate in the competition." "Okay, good. Break a leg." "Thank you." Cindy nodded, then turned and ran toward her team. But after running a few steps, she stopped again. Then she turned to James and said, "Do you want to come back this afternoon to watch my match? It's at 3 in the main auditorium." James really wanted to say yes, but he immediately felt cold gazes from beside him. We'll see," he said. Cindy looked at the hostile gazes of the three beauties and immediately understood. Then she smiled and said to James, "I understand. We'll meet again in the future." James seemed a little embarrassed, but he endured it. Soon, Cindy and her team disappeared through the gate. James cleared his throat and said to the three beauties, "Well, let's go in and take a look." Why are you so impatient? Vanessa seemed to see James's embarrassment and looked at him curiously. James glared at her angrily. What are you talking about? Vanessa, relax, said Krista. Cambridge is a world-famous school. We naturally have to experience it. A brainy girl like her was right at home in a place like this. Krista's right, said Katie in her gentle voice. We have to go in and take a look. Seeing this scene, James sighed to himself. I thought I was calling the shots around here. Then he shook his head and walked towards the University of Cambridge. Don't say that, said Katie. You will always be our pillar. The three beauties followed James's footsteps closely. They hugged him from both sides. Countless students from all over the world looked at James with envy. The campus of the University of Cambridge was really beautiful. James and the others felt as if they were walking through a beautiful oil painting. But all the time, James was silently looking at the reward he had just received and the location of the next check-in in his heart. He first looked through the storage space for his special items, and with a glance, he saw the information about the Excalibur Company as well as the mutual equity certificates. This was a company ranked in the top 10 in London, mainly in the iron industry. Its current market value was more than £70 billion. That the system had had such a big company to give away really surprised James. It seemed there was nothing it couldn't do. The next mission spot was on the island of ice, which was close to the Arctic Circle. The northern lights were said to be gorgeous there. After a round of sightseeing, it was already afternoon, and they just happened to walk in front of the Grand Hall of the University of Cambridge. Perhaps it was fate, but James and the other three again ran into Cindy and her team. Hey, we meet again. Cindy greeted James warmly. Yeah, what a coincidence. Compared to Cindy's heartfelt tone, James seemed a little embarrassed. Well, since it's fate, we're going in to prepare for the competition. Do you guys want to go in with us? That way you won't need any tickets. James seemed to be hesitating. He didn't know how to answer. Okay. Krista, on the other hand, agreed right away. Cindy went over and whispered a few words to Professor West. Then she came over and said that everything was settled. Just like that, James and the three beauties followed the American team into the auditorium. They were ready to watch the competition. The auditorium was already bustling with activity. It was set up like a basketball court with a ring-shaped viewing platform around the place where the competition would take place. Above the central stage was a large LED display screen. Other large LED screens were placed elsewhere, making the entire venue look full of technology. Following Cindy's team in front, under the instructions of a guide, James and the three beauties walked all the way to the front of the rows of seats. The view from here was excellent. The seats soon filled up with spectators. Some of them were students from the University of Cambridge, while others were spectators from around England. Others were from all over the world. They were all interested in memory and excited to witness this memory competition. Soon the entire auditorium was filled to the brim. Even the aisles were filled with people. The host walked down to the stage. As he did, the atmosphere in the entire stadium instantly became lively. When he gave the signal, dozens of contestants from all over the world stepped onto the competition stage. Each wore a number. Cindy wore number 59 on her back and stood in the corresponding area of the stage. James saw that there were a total of 89 contestants from all over the world. After all the contestants were in position, the host began to ask the questions. The first fierce battle began. The first round's question was about the positions of the colored blocks making up a huge cube. The cube was positioned in the center of the stage. It was made up of hundreds of blocks. No ordinary person could memorize them all. But as the host began counting down, the 89 contestants on the stage began to rapidly memorize in their own ways. Although their methods were different, they were all definitely the best of the best. Soon, some contestants closed their eyes. It was clear that they had already memorized the colors of the cube. According to the host, all 89 contestants were able to recite the correct answers within the stipulated time. But the second, third, and fourth rounds of questions were all even harder than the first. Finally, there were only 10 contestants left on the stage. Cindy was still among them. She was very steady. The entire competition had been very intense and exciting. Vanessa, Katie, and Krista were spellbound. They kept applauding, but James didn't find the feats too difficult. They didn't seem challenging at all to him. He just needed one look and he could capture any scene like a high-definition camera. Then when he needed it, he would extract it as if it were saved to a hard drive. He would read it like he was reading a lesson. Now the host began the fifth round of the competition. The fifth round of the competition was to quickly memorize large amounts of data, perform calculations, and give the correct answers. The contestants had 1 minute to do this. Only the 5 who were quickest to give their answers would proceed to the next round. After the first 4 rounds of the competition, the remaining contestants were all veterans. Below the stage, the representatives from the various countries broke out in a cold sweat for the contestants on the stage. And before the match even began, the contestants' foreheads were drenched in sweat because they were nervous and intensely focused. Cindy was still as calm as ever. She seemed to be very confident, but the rest of her team was very nervous. This was because she was the only American contestant left. Even Vanessa, Katie, and Krista were extremely nervous at this moment. A few pairs of pink fists unconsciously clenched. As the host announced the start of the 5th round of competition, the entire auditorium instantly quieted down. It was as if time had suddenly stopped here, leaving only the 10 team members on the stage in a crazy brainstorm. The atmosphere of the competition was very tense, but the competition wouldn't last long. In less than a minute, all the answers had been given. After the dust settled, everyone's heart was in their throat as the host began to verify the validity of the answers. Of the first 9 contestants to be checked, 4 were eliminated due to errors in their answers. The remaining 5 contestants were all correct, which meant that they would be judged on how long it had taken them to respond. There was only one contestant left in the arena whose answer had yet to be verified, and this contestant was the American, Cindy. If Cindy's answers were correct and the time she'd used was less than the last of the other 5 remaining contestants, she would advance to the next round. Otherwise, Cindy would be eliminated. As the host began to reveal the answers one by one, everyone on the American team felt like they couldn't breathe. They had to wait until the last number, but Cindy's answers were correct. In the end, the host still regretfully announced that Cindy had been eliminated. The lowest ranking of her rivals had taken 56.03 seconds to respond, and Cindy had taken 56.04 seconds. Because of that 0.01 second gap, she was unfortunately eliminated. Episode 185, Challenge. Everyone felt sorry for Cindy. However, a competition was a competition. No matter how regretful they felt, they could only accept the ruling. Cindy was very strong and didn't shed any tears. She kept waving goodbye to everyone with a smile on her face, and the host kept consoling her, saying that she was one of the top 6 memory masters in the world. However, James could see the sadness and guilt in Cindy's heart. He could see that she was trying her best to hold back her tears. Cindy soon returned to the American team. Although all the team members felt disappointed, they greeted her with smiles and encouraged her for making a fantastic effort. Even Vanessa, Krista, and Katie comforted Cindy. "I think you were really awesome," said Vanessa, charging ahead as usual. "Those numbers are so complicated. I'm really curious about your brain. How can you remember so many things so accurately?" "Yes, Cindy, I think you're really amazing. How come I didn't realize you were this amazing when we were at school together?" asked Katie. "I admire you immensely," said Krista. However, the more nice things everyone said, the guiltier Cindy felt. So James decided not to say anything. The competition on the stage was getting more and more intense. However, now that the American team had lost, all its members had lost interest in the competition. In the end, a Polish competitor named Witkowski won the final championship and became the first world memory master. In order to liven up the atmosphere, the host began to test the memories of some of the audience members. 100 people were selected at random to go up on the stage and compete with Witkowski on the spot. These 100 spectators would memorize a series of numbers together, while Witkowski would memorize them alone. The goal was to recite the series fastest. James was one of the spectators selected. He felt that this was an opportunity. The competition started. The world memory master had a relaxed expression on his face. In comparison, the 100 spectators looked nervous. Although they had the advantage in numbers, they didn't know how much that would help. Moreover, most of the 100 spectators did not know each other and they came from different countries. It would be hard for them to work together. However, James did not need their help and cooperation because to him, this was a simple task. The host recited the numbers and everyone got busy filling out the answers. They were afraid that if they were too slow, they would not be able to remember. But James had his hands behind his back. He looked relaxed. He was not in a hurry. However, this made Vanessa, who was more impatient, start to be anxious. In the corner of her eye, she saw that Witkowski had already finished writing down the numbers. James still looked relaxed. Vanessa directly shouted at him. "James, hurry up!" she cried. She was worried for him. Finally, James started to write. The host started to verify the answers one by one on the stage. First, he verified Witkowski's answers. Needless to say, they were completely correct. The 100 audience members' answers were also accurate. After the verification was over, the host said in surprise, "Oh, my God, there was actually an audience member who wrote down all the numbers flawlessly." The entire audience cheered. No one had expected that anyone but Witkowski would actually be able to remember all the correct answers. It was truly unbelievable. Even the champion himself looked impressed. In the end, when the host finished verifying all the audience members' answers, only James's were completely correct. The host asked James, "How did you do it? Can you share your technique?" James took the microphone and thought for a while. He did not want to answer the host's question. Instead, he looked directly at Witkowski and said, "I want to challenge you. What do you say?" The entire auditorium paused for a moment after James said this. Then, like a tsunami, there was an uproar in the auditorium. "This guy, what's he doing? Challenging the master, he's gonna go down." Did I hear that right? Even the host was momentarily stunned, not knowing how to answer. In his career as a host, he had never met someone so confident. But Witkowski looked at James and smiled. "Okay, I'm very happy to accept your challenge." Witkowski's words shocked the audience again. Obviously, he knew James was a force to be reckoned with. All kinds of exclamations broke out in the auditorium once again. But even though Witkowski had agreed to fight James, the host still asked the director what to do. After all, he was just a host and could not make the final decision. But the director quickly agreed to proceed. It would make good TV. When the host returned to the arena, he confirmed with Witkowski again. "Mr. Witkowski, sir, are you sure you want to fight this man?" "I'm sure," Witkowski answered without thinking. Obviously, he'd already made his decision. And that was what Witkowski felt was right. A true champion had to be willing to accept challenges. The host nodded to the camera crew. "Okay." Then he started the contest. There are a total of 7 colors on the screen. Each color represents a question, for a total of 7 questions. The darker the color, the more difficult the question is. Please choose the question. James politely extended his hand to Witkowski. "You go first." Witkowski, on the other hand, insisted that James choose first. The two of them seemed very calm and polite. Finally, James smiled shyly and nodded to Witkowski. "All right." At this time, Vanessa looked at James on the stage and cheered for him. "You can do it!" As Vanessa cheered, many others joined in. They admired James for issuing this challenge. However, there were also so many people who thought that he was just being arrogant. However, James did not care what the audience thought. He waved at Vanessa, Katie, and Krista. He glanced at Cindy, then pointed at the questions and said to the host, "Just start wherever. I'll go through all of them." This sentence instantly stunned the host. For a moment, he stood rooted to the spot, unable to speak. It seemed this guy called James thought pretty highly of himself. The host knew that this set of memory problems was actually much more difficult than those used during the main competition. You'd have to be inhumanly good to get all of them right. The entire auditorium was once again in an uproar because of James's words. Discussions and exclamations shook the roof. Cindy hadn't understood why James would look at her the way that he had, but now she seemed to instantly understand. James was going to win the championship for her and take back the glory that should belong to the United States. The host looked at James in disbelief. "Mr. Tucker, sir, I have to confirm that with you. Are you sure about your choice?" James nodded and said seriously, "I am very sure." "Okay, then let the competition begin." As the host announced the start of the competition, he zoomed in on the first question on the screen. James and Witkowski began writing down their answers. In less than 10 seconds, James had completed the answer to the first memory problem. He looked at his opponent Witkowski with a relaxed expression. James's swift answer caused the entire audience to boil once again. Was his answer the correct one? No ordinary person could solve problems like these that quickly. But they didn't know that James was not an ordinary person. When Witkowski saw James finish writing so quickly, he looked relaxed. He too figured that James was just bluffing. Witkowski finally finished writing. The host began to verify the answers. Although everyone thought they knew James was bluffing, when the host looked over his answer, everyone held their breath. The host cried out in surprise, "Heavens! His answer is actually completely correct!" James had finished writing first, so he had scored the first point of the competition.